Hello and welcome to episode 292 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. How's it going?
Hello, Jason. It's going well. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm home, back from my unexpected trip to Istanbul. I'm tired. Apparently, I can't handle jet lag like I used to.
Oh,
Yeah, I know. It's not great, but I'm here, and I'm awake with you right now.
you're here and we're tempting fate somewhat because we're recording a little early today. So there's still plenty of time for something to happen after we hit the stop button. I'm trying to preempt
nothing,
that.
Nothing will
mentioning
happen. It'll be fine. It'll be fine because we know we can predict the future, and we know that there's not going to be any major updates with the Boeing strike or anything because they basically have told us so far there is no update.
There is no update. And that's the update.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. We do have a great show for you today. An absolutely fantastic conversation coming up this week. I mentioned it last week, but this week we are chatting with Max from Airplane Facts with Max. Not only do you get an airplane fact, but you get a comparison and contrast between The Lord of the Rings. And that sounds crazy, but it's just so crazy, it works. So we're talking with Max about all things aircraft mechanic, all things Tolkien, and how he's found a niche doing that. So we'll talk with Max a little bit later in this show.
Fantastic.
We now go to some maintenance issues. The NTSB released its preliminary report on the Frontier flight that made an emergency landing in Las Vegas a few weeks ago. What we physically saw on the outside was an airplane landing, and then the landing gear. At that point, we didn't know exactly what was on fire, but there was a fire near the landing gear. We now know at this point that that was fire from the brakes, and we'll get to why that happened in just a moment. But let's back up to the NTSB basically burying the lead about what their investigation has led to.
That was a little weird, wasn't it?
They go through this whole thing, and we'll talk about the whole list of what happened and everything like that. And then they get to the bottom, and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we found a computer fan that was on fire and broke.
That's a problem. We should probably be leading the report there, but at least it's there at all.
Yeah. So there was a burning smell, acrid smoke in the cabin, but no visible smoke at the beginning. Smelled of petroleum and rubber. So anybody who has ever heard or smelled an electrical fire and melting plastic knows what they were smelling. So they donned their oxygen masks, the pilots did, and they initiated an emergency descent into Las Vegas. As they were running through the quick reference handbook, the autopilot and auto throttle became unavailable. So the captain's focusing on flying the airplane. The first officer is focusing on helping the captain fly by calling out airspeed references and things like that, as well as communicating with air traffic control. From the report, the crew, based on what the QRH was telling them, if the source of the smoke or the fumes cannot be determined, they elected to say, yeah, we can't figure that out. So they're going to go with the electrical emergency configuration, which drops the ram air turbine, or RAT. And that, or the fire and smoke in where this computer is located, they're not sure yet. That's still part of the investigation. But something led to limited data being displayed on the captain's primary flight display. So it wasn't quite leaning out the window to see where you were going, but the systems on the aircraft were quite degraded. So when they landed, the captain said that he went full reverse thrust and smashed on the brakes because he didn't sense that the aircraft had any auto brakes and didn't sense that there was any anti-skid. So no auto brakes, no anti-skid, smashing on the brakes. This is where you get the fire in the landing gear because of the extreme heat and pressure being put on the brakes. So that's where that came from.
Yeah, and that's exactly why after rejected takeoff at any sort of higher speed on the takeoff roll, that's often why pilots have to basically sideline the aircraft for a little bit to do a rejected takeoff checklist, because the brakes might just be too hot to the point where this exact situation could occur. And you certainly wouldn't want to go for another takeoff while your brakes are about to spontaneously combust.
Yeah, you certainly don't want that.
Nobody wants that. That's not good for anyone. But in this case, the pilot elected not to evacuate the aircraft because the fire crews said, "Nah, we got it. We put out the fire. You're all good." So, hey, at least that's nice.
Yeah, they did not evacuate using the slides. They made the determination that they could safely get everybody off with stairs, which is exactly what happened, and there were no injuries whatsoever. The aircraft is still hanging out in Las Vegas today.
Yeah. Many eyes will be kept on to see if this is just a manufacturing issue with that fan, or if this is a wider issue that Airbus will have to tackle fleet-wide. I'm sure the NTSB is all over this, even if they did bury the lead.
Well, Jason, unfortunately, it sounds like that might not be the only Frontier plane that's grounded for a while coming up soon. So far, Frontier, because of the newness of its fleet, has been able to be outside of the grounding because inspections are required window due to the Pratt & Whitney geared turbofan engines. But it sounds like that luck is about to run out. We don't know when the aircraft might need to go in. We don't know for how long they might need to go in. But at the moment, it looks like at least some of the Frontier aircraft will also be affected, at least by inspection criteria, if not replacement of any parts or anything like that. So
yeah, nobody seems to be able to escape this particular fate. And I guess at this point, unless the engines are really actually brand new, since they presumably have fixed this issue on new deliveries. But yeah, Frontier has taken delivery of a kind of a staggering number of 320 family aircraft. But even these new aircraft, at some point, they have to be sidelined for the infamous Pratt inspections. Your turn. Yeah. We'll see what happens to Frontier, because it's damn near killed Spirit. We'll talk about in a minute how it's damn near killing JetBlue at the same time. We already know it has outright killed other airlines, specifically, what was it, the one in India that I can't remember the name of already? It's already left my memory.
They've already gone. They're
already gone. I can't even remember them. We know Indigo is doing okay as best it can, but we got a lot more to talk about this particular topic.
Yeah. So like Jason mentioned, JetBlue has been in the muck and mire as far as Pratt & Whitney engine problems are concerned. And during their third quarter financial results, JetBlue says that, among other things, their long-term capacity planning continues to be challenged by GTF-powered aircraft that are on the ground. That was the CEO, Joanna Garrity, speaking. And then Marty St. George says, and this was a diplomatic quote on his behalf, quote, "We continue to be very frustrated as far as status right now, as far as being able to actually get a good handle on what is happening with Pratt."
Oh, Marty, I want more spin on that. There's not enough Boston in that particular quote.
There is that, but also I think that quote that's an executive from a major Pratt & Whitney customer saying, "We don't know exactly what's happening."
And we've talked about this a number of times, where airlines across the world are extremely frustrated with both Airbus at this point and Pratt, because there seems to be no consensus amongst anyone on when this is going to get better. And we keep hearing that, oh, we've hit the peak number of aircraft that are going to be impacted by this and things are trending down. But on the airline side, that really doesn't seem to be the messaging, does it?
No. It's frustrating. I mean, obviously, I'm not a Pratt & Whitney customer, other than, flying on aircraft that...
I mean, in the roundabout way, you are. You are buying a ticket on an airline that operates its aircraft using Pratt & Whitney engines. It does impact you in one way or another.
Eventually, yes. But my level of frustration, I guess, is proportional to my financial commitment to Pratt & Whitney. As an airline, I can only imagine that the conversations have been frank. Let me put it that way, in diplomatic context. A frank exchange of views, I'm sure, is being had on a regular basis, because I can only imagine how airlines are feeling about not necessarily, the actual thing that's happening, but just the not knowing exactly what's happening.
Yeah, this is especially tough for JetBlue right now, which finds itself in kind of a do or die scenario. It has to turn the business around. It has to do things that will generate profit, which is, the goal of any real business. And as much as JetBlue can do with the things it's announced, refocusing on New York and opening lounges and differentiating its extra legroom seating, which it said it's going to do today, or this week they announced, if they have mid to high teen number of aircraft, so anywhere in the, high teens, this could be 18, near 20 aircraft grounded in its fleet in 2025, that's a huge chunk of its fleet, making it, I don't know, maybe impossible for the airline to complete its turnaround process. What is it? Jet forward, I think is what they call it. So what I'm trying to say here is, Marty, if you're listening, we'd love to have you as a guest. So come on board.
Where you can say slightly less diplomatic things, but we are family friendly, so not too
Probably
undiplomatic.
keep it diplomatic, but maybe less diplomatic than Wall Street
earnings call. Right.
Yeah.
We head north of the border now for a little bit, but then we get sent back south because on August 5th, a hailstorm impacted Calgary Airport especially and damaged an extensive portion of WestJet's fleet. It now turns out, and this comes to us from a longtime podcast listener, and we'll call them a Canadian plane person, there are 3 737-700s that WestJet has determined are not repairable. Or perhaps the insurance company has determined that they're not repairable, that received enough damage that they are retiring the aircraft. The first one, CGYWJ, has been flown down to Tucson, and there are 2 more, CGWJT and CGWCN, that are slated to head down either later this week or early next. What's interesting here is that the aircraft are being flown from Calgary to Tucson, Arizona, unpressurized.
Ooh, that tells you, I think, all you need to know. There adds be some holes in that airplane. That
adds a bit of time. Adds a bit of time to the flight. About 2.5 hours added to the flight. So not great, but great that they're airworthy enough to retire and they don't have to chop them up in Calgary.
That's really rough. I mean, we saw images of these aircraft, and they were truly beat up by this hailstorm. It's not surprising that at least one of these aircraft was beyond economical repair, but 3 of them, aircraft that probably had quite a bit of life left in them, especially at WestJet, where they're scrapping for aircraft at this point. Maybe scrapping is the wrong word because they're scrapping these planes, but they need aircraft in their fleet, and they're doing things like reintegrating swoop aircraft into WestJet mainline that aren't up to WestJet standards, and they're also taking in Sunwing Airlines aircraft next year that also won't be up to the mainline standards. So losing these 3 aircraft, especially 700s, which can potentially do some high operations that I think WestJet might actually need, that's rough. That's not great because we all know they ain't making any more 700s.
And the replacement is nowhere near available.
Yeah, we haven't really had an update on that in a long time, have we?
Nope.
Okay.
That's the best I got.
For, posterity, that we're talking about the MAX 7 and 10. Haven't heard an update on those in a very long time.
I will say that the MAX 10 is flying this week.
Oh, that's good. That's something.
It has started flying again for the first time in a while. So I'm not sure exactly what they're up to, but the aircraft is flying.
That's good news.
Let's take a quick break, and then we will come back with our chat with Max from Airplane Facts with Max. As promised, we are here with a fascinating and incredible conversation, and one that I am so excited to have. Welcome to the AvTalk podcast, Max from Airplane Facts with Max.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. You did a pre-interview with my wife just a moment ago because she's the one who found your videos first and showed me and got me hooked. She's like, you're really going to like this. And it's true. I do really like this. For those that, we played a little clip before this conversation to kind of prime everybody, but for those that don't watch your stuff on a regular basis. Can you describe what it is you're doing?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing to try to describe, but I'm an aircraft mechanic. So I make videos called Airplane Facts with Max, and I basically compare and contrast the world of aviation maintenance and the world of J.R.R. Tolkien. And I kind of try to clarify some of the glaring differences between airplanes and Lord of the Rings, because people get confused. Sometimes they look at an airplane, but is that from Lord of the Rings? And it's actually not.
There are so many things that I thought were from the Lord of the Rings that are just in fact parts of an airplane.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
But yeah, I kind of talk about how different parts or components of aircraft, and then I kind of talk about Lord of the Rings. So that's kind of what I do, I guess.
How? Just how did this get started? I mean, there's no through line in my mind that goes, this is what somebody should do. And yet, it is incredibly compelling.
Yeah. So when I started making videos about 2 years ago, I've been an aircraft mechanic for quite some time. And I was kind of at a low point in my life, and my wife had recently passed away. And a few months after that, I found myself at work, and I was on Instagram, and I posted a story to my page. And I just was like, this is an airplane tire, and it's different than the tire on your car because it's on an airplane and not a car. And people were like, oh, my friends were like, that's really funny. And I kind of was making like little stories like that just to my friends, and they thought they were funny. So then one day I uploaded those to TikTok, and it just kind of took off on its own from there, because people were like, this is really funny, right? I guess. And then I was rereading Lord of the Rings and getting back into Tolkien. And I was like, I wonder if I could make one of my little airplane facts about Lord of the Rings, but how could I do that? And I started looking at the airplane because I love Lord of the Rings, obviously. And so I was looking at the engine, and I saw the fan blades, and I was like, blades, fan blades, sword blades. I could talk about that. And then it just kind of became its own thing. And after that first Lord of the Rings one, I was like, there's no way I could keep doing Lord of the Rings ones. And then I kept coming up with more ideas, and it just kind of spiraled from there.
How do you keep coming up with new ideas? Are you looking at the airplane first and then going, okay, this is how I can do this? Or is there a scene in one of the books and you're like, okay, I've got it?
So I've kind of come up with a way of thinking about it. Usually I'm at work, and I only make really like 2 to 4 videos a month, maybe. And they're only like a minute long. So I'm not putting out videos that often because it takes me time to kind of think of something. And I'll look at the airplane and I think like, what's Lord of the Rings here? Or I'll see a video online, and then I'll be like, okay, I could talk about that. So I had a video that I did recently that really got a lot of views on it. And it was about speed tape, and
everyone loves to freak out that there's duct tape on their airplane.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that, as an aviation maintenance professional, we're always like, that's not duct tape. It's not holding anything together. And so then, I'm making the video, and I noticed that the part tape was the strake on the engine cowling. And I was like, okay, well, what's the strake do, right? And it helps redirect airflow over the wings to increase lift. And I was like, redirect. So then I think, Aragorn redirected Sauron's forces in Return of the King when he showed himself in the Palantir, right? So that's kind of how that comes about in my head, I guess.
So that's the idea process. And this is where I am most in awe of these videos. How do you shoot the video? Do you write a script and then work it all out? Or is this just something where you pick up the camera and you're like, all right, I've got an idea, let's go?
It's kind of the second. I have an idea, let's go, right? And I usually film the videos when I'm on my lunch break or on break time, because I don't want anybody else in the background. I don't, obviously don't want the airplanes to be moving or functional at the time, right? And so during lunch, everybody's going to eat their food, and I can just kind of walk out there and take a little quick video on the plane. And I think about what I'm going to say before. So I have an idea of the kind of the video that I'm going to make. And then I'm like, all right, well, let's go do it real fast, and it's just like a quick 1 minute, 1.5 minute video. So it doesn't take long. I don't edit them or anything.
I mean, but that's the crazy part to me, is that you don't edit them, because it's not a paragraph. It's a page of information. And every time I watch them, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, how do you get all that out? I mean, is it just like whatever I get out in a take is what I get? Or do you give yourself some leeway to do another take?
Oh, I give myself leeway to do another take. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
It usually takes me a couple before I get out without stumbling or mumbling. But it's a gift I didn't really realize I had, I guess, until I started doing it. And then when I first started, if you went back to my older videos, they're only like 20 or 30 seconds long. And I kind of learned, it's kind of evolved over the years where I like to get more in depth on the aircraft. I used to kind of do my segue. I used to be like, right away, big, this is a part of an airplane. And then I just do the Lord of the Rings tangent. And then as it's kind of grown, I kind of have made it like 50% airplane and 50% Lord of the Rings. And that way I realized I'm actually able to kind of teach people about some of these components that are on aircraft, as well as teach people about Lord of the Rings. And who doesn't like learning about both of those things? They're wonderful.
I mean, I've been just along for the ride. I mean, I know more about the airplane stuff probably than most viewers, but I know much less about the Tolkien stuff than most, maybe, I don't know. But I don't know very much. So it's been interesting to follow along and be like, okay, I don't necessarily see how they can, they're different, but
they're different. They are different.
I'm learning, but it's been a lot of fun.
And, I think in aviation, especially as mechanics, we don't get a lot of representation in the field as a profession. Not a lot of people think about aircraft maintenance unless their flight's getting delayed. Most people don't know what goes into maintaining aircraft. And so I think that there's like a fascination with aviation maintenance and kind of the mechanical side of flying that a lot of people don't get to see very often. And I really enjoy being able to kind of share that into that side of the industry.
Other than having well over 1 million followers across multiple social media platforms, what's been the reaction from people? Is it more, yay, I'm learning about airplanes, hey, this is really cool, you're talking about Tolkien? Or is it just, I very much enjoy these videos, I find them interesting?
It's been a mix of all three. It's really interesting. There's people that follow me and they'll comment and they'll be like, I don't care about airplanes at all, but I love Lord of the Rings. And then there's people like, I don't care about this Lord of the Rings stuff, but I love airplanes. And for some reason, they both like the way that I deliver stuff. And then there's people that are like, I don't like airplanes or Lord of the Rings, but for some reason, I really like watching your videos. And so it's kind of been that. And the one thing that's really surprised me, because I've been doing this for about 2 years now, is that the reaction that I've received personally has like been overwhelmingly positive for the most part. I remember when my first video kind of started going kind of viral and I was like, oh no, here comes the trolls, not like the trolls that the Fellowship encountered in Moria after they went into the Chamber of Marzabul, which was the records chamber that they found Balin's tomb in, but more like the trolls that you see in internet comments. And they never really showed up and people have been really positive the whole time.
That's fantastic. I mean, I've often said that, aviation's, in my experience, been one of the places where the community is rather tight-knit. And I assume that the Tolkien community is probably very similar. So I guess I'm not totally surprised that the reception's been overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah. And it's been so much fun to do, I've learned to really enjoy making the videos. For me, it's low stress. Some weeks I'm like, I don't feel like I didn't make a video last week. I didn't feel like it. I don't really have like a content plan or strategy. I'm just kind of posting when I feel like posting something, when I have an idea, so it's like low stress and really fun. And, it's become like a fun creative outlet for me.
What do your coworkers think?
The older guys usually have no idea that I do it. They don't care. They're like, I don't know what Lord of the Rings is. And some people, most of them, they're like, they think it's pretty cool. They're like, this is awesome, dude. I don't know. I think most people think it's pretty fun. It was really funny. One of the days I was working and one of the guys was like, what are you reading? And I was like, oh, Lord of the Rings. And he's like, oh, I think my wife really likes that. But every time I walk by the TV, they're doing inappropriate stuff on the TV. And I was like, I think you're thinking of Game of Thrones, man. Anyways, sorry.
That's I mean, probably not the case. Yeah, it's a different show, different movies.
Yeah, I think the reception there has been pretty good too. So, it's fun to do.
Is there any place you want to take this, or is it just something that, hey, this is fun, I'm enjoying this, don't mess with a good thing?
It's kind of mostly like I'm just kind of having fun and enjoying it, I don't really have I don't know where I would take it, I don't know, like, what do you do? I never, I didn't like set out to be like, I want to build a social media presence. I was just like, I just thought it was fun. I just thought it was fun.
I'm going to make some videos about
aircraft
facts.
And yeah, the reception and the growth of it has been mind-boggling to me. I really never expected anybody to watch any of these videos.
And yet here you are, millions of views later.
Yeah, and there's been fun things that I got to do with it as a result of the account, and that I don't take that for granted. I got to go to Comic-Con for the Rings of Power Season 2 events, and I've met some people that are musicians that I really look up to, and I've gotten to hang out with them at their shows and stuff, and that's like been really cool and like a fun, unexpected journey, if you will, that's kind of come about from this thing.
As someone who partially has the job, the reason I'm talking to you now is because I made a map of where you could smell chocolate from a factory in Chicago. I totally understand. So it makes perfect sense to me why people are finding these videos and enjoying them. Have you seen like a particular, have the reaction, so-called reaction videos where like somebody sends something in and then you talk about that? Have people found that more engaging, or is it just kind of across the board? Some videos are heavy hitters and then others not so much.
It's kind of random. I don't know how the algorithm works. I can't figure it out. I have noticed that a lot of times the ones where like I stitch a video in after like somebody seeing tape or something like that kind of go off a little bit higher. Or like there was one where somebody's sitting next to like a broken window reveal on the airplane. I'm like, that's not a window.
Right.
Those ones seem to do really well. I think some of the reason is it's kind of takes you all over the place. But I think that I try to, in those videos, like with the window and the speed tape one, I'm hoping that what I can do is kind of ensure to people that like these are safe defects. You know what I mean? Like none of this is jeopardizing safety of flight.
While they look kind of scary, they're cosmetic.
Yeah. Like I totally get why somebody would see, a mechanic putting tape on the engine, like, why is he putting tape on this? And you're like, well, we can talk about
so many reasons. Yeah.
So many reasons. Like, do you want your flight to have a 4-hour delay because you're waiting for sealant to cure, or do you want us to just throw some speed tape on it?
I'm all for speed tape any day of the week.
Or like there's sometimes people are like, oh, I don't, you shouldn't be flying a plane with that much tape on the wing. I'm like, okay, so do you want to wait for the plane to be repainted, or do you want us to put some speed tape on it? Because the painting is going to take a while and you're in like a class 3 maintenance station. There's no reason.
Kind of switching over from just the videos, but like as a mechanic, is there a favorite plane that you really love to work on, or a not favorite plane?
I have 2 answers. One of them's kind of a joke answer, and one of them is a more real answer. But I always tell people my favorite plane is the Q400, the Bombardier Q400.
Okay.
My least favorite plane to work on is also the Bombardier Q400. It's the first plane I ever worked on, and it's very maintenance not friendly. It's not friendly to mechanics. A lot of things on it are hard to work on, and it's sometimes. But since it's the first one I ever worked on, I was like, oh, this is just how planes are. I didn't know any different. And then as I've grown in my career and started working on different fleet types, I'm like, oh, that thing sucks to work on. But I have so much respect for the Q400. But I think my favorite plane to work on is probably the 777-200.
Why the 200 specifically?
I haven't worked on the 300 very often, but the 300 I do heavy maintenance, so heavy checks, and the 300's just so much bigger that there's a lot more to do. Like changing the landing gear on a 300 is a little bit more involved than changing the landing gear on a 200. And, I really like the 200. It works really well.
Cool.
The 300 is the engines are a little bit too big. I'm like, this is ridiculous.
And they're really only getting bigger.
Yeah, it's really cool. I like it. I'm just like, man, I don't want to climb up 4 flights of stairs just to get to the top of the engine pylon. This is wild, dude.
It's a 4-story building just to get to the top of the engine. Yeah, I guess when you think about it like that.
The 777, it's a pretty good plane to work on. I've really enjoyed the 777.
Before I let you go, I thought we could play a game.
Yeah.
I'm going to name an airplane part.
Okay.
And I want to see how that relates. And we can go into as much or little detail as you want. But I want to see if I can put you on the spot, how it compares and contrasts to Lord of the Rings.
All right, let's try.
All right. The APU.
The APU, auxiliary power unit, that is what, can provide electrical power and pneumatic power on the ground to start or stop the engines, which is a little bit different than the starting of the events in the War of the Ring that are kind of kicked off after Frodo leaves the Shire and begins his journey through the Old Forest, where he meets Tom Bombadil and has to cross through the Barrow Downs before reaching the town of Bree, where he would encounter Strider. And then they would venture across the Midgewater Marsh eventually until Frodo got stabbed on Weathertop by one of the Nazgul. How's that?
Incredible. Because again, not rehearsed, not scripted, just off the cuff. Awesome. How about the flight data recorder?
A flight data recorder. Okay, so the flight data recorder is also known as the black box, which is what records inputs from the flights. And, that is different than maybe the records that were kept in Minas Tirith that Gandalf, who was also known in Gondor as Mithrandir, would go through when he was scouring for Isildur's Count of the Ring after he left the Shire for 17 years. Perfect. You want to do one more? Yeah, this is fun.
All right, let's go flaps.
Flaps. The flaps, high lift device, trailing edge of the wings. They're used to increase lift, especially during phases of flight, like takeoff and landing. They're different than the flapping of the wings of the great eagles, which were sent to Middle-earth by the Valar Manwë, who would rescue Gandalf from the peak of Orthanc after he was imprisoned by Sauron, carrying him to Rohan, where he would meet with King Theoden and take the horse Shadowfax to head north.
Perfect. Love it. Max, you are not just an airplane mechanic. You are not just a Tolkien fan, but you've got some other projects that you work on. So tell us where people can find Airplane Facts with Max and some of the other stuff you're doing.
So yeah, Airplane Facts with Max. I have a TikTok. I have a Instagram. You can find me there. I'm also, sometimes I stream games on Twitch when I have some free time after my kids are asleep. So you might see me streaming on Twitch sometimes. Again, that's Airplane Facts with Max there. And then I write and record music under my name, Max Comer. You can find that on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you listen to music, really. It's not about Lord of the Rings or airplanes. It's
I was listening to some of the stuff before we chatted, and I was enjoying it. And I was like, oh, wait, we need to get ready to go now. We'll put links to all of Max's stuff in the show notes. We've been chatting with Max Comer from Airplane Facts with Max, an airline mechanic with an encyclopedic knowledge of Tolkien's works and just an all-around fascinating human being to chat with. Max, thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, thanks for having me.
Welcome back. Jason, do you have an encyclopedic knowledge of aircraft parts and J.R.R. Tolkien's work?
I can't say I have encyclopedic knowledge of anything ever, especially those two topics, probably.
Fair enough. Then we won't play the game that I played with Max for fear of showing Max up. We'll say that, right? Let's see. We go to Saudi Arabia because Riyadh Air has finally placed its narrow-body order, ordering 60 A321 Neo family-ish aircraft. We don't know
of
exactly,
some sort.
Are they regular Neos, LRs, XLRs? Nobody knows. But that's the order, and there's 60 of them. So good for them.
60 of them at some point of some flavor. We don't know when, don't know what kind, but 60. That's what we know.
But it's worth talking about because it is, in fact, an order. It's not just we're thinking about possibly considering ordering these.
That's good. Not an LOI, not a memorandum of understanding. It is an order. They want these airplanes, and they'll get them eventually.
At some point.
Get at the back of the line.
Speaking of aircraft orders, we'll continue on the way with LATAM ordering a firm 10 787-9s plus 5 more if they want them later on.
That's exciting. Particularly exciting was the absolutely ancient rendering that Boeing put out of a LATAM 787-9, which was really confusing because LATAM has lots of 787-9s that they could surely use an actual photo of. I mean, it was so dated, it had the One World logo on R1 door, which was, I think it was the R1 door, but like that was probably the original rendering from the original order. Like, are the photographers at Boeing on strike as well? Or
we paid money for this rendering. We're going to use it.
We're going to use it. We're going to get some more use out of it. But yeah, I just thought that was particularly funny. But good news for Boeing at a time where good news does not seem to be the norm or really ever come.
Well, we'll take it where we can get it. Good news for Airbus and Iberia, as the first A321XLR was delivered today, went home from Hamburg to Madrid, and it's scheduled to enter service next week already.
Yeah, kind of
There you
weird
go.
that we left it for all the way down here as like an also mention. This is, I don't know, probably should have mentioned this earlier, but it's a derivative of a re-engined aircraft.
It's an impressive aircraft for a variety of reasons, all of which we've discussed. We've done videos on it. We've written blog posts on it. It's been delivered. I'm excited to see it in service. So we can certainly talk about it when Iberia takes it next week.
Yes. We will be much more excited when this aircraft does the thing that it was built to do, and Madrid to Boston on a mainline airline is not very exciting.
No.
But when this aircraft starts doing some truly impressive stuff, or when it hits the schedule of ULCC doing some 5,000-mile transoceanic route, that's when it will truly stretch its legs. But this ain't it. It's just the first delivery.
Yeah, when we see Tampa Abuja, then
ooh, that's a good one.
That's when we're going to be excited about it. But yeah, no, congratulations to Airbus and Iberia for taking delivery and
getting literally anything out the door these days is a big deal.
Yes. Well, if you can't get new aircraft, Jason, maybe you can get some used aircraft, maybe 23 used aircraft.
Yeah. Well, if you're looking for some very yellow aircraft, a bunch of them, 23, are about to hit the market, coming from Spirit Airlines, which is desperate for cash at this point. $519 million for these aircraft, which is not chump change. Spirit will be getting rid of 23 of its older A320ceo aircraft family, which is going to put it, this is problematic, even more reliant on its A320neo family aircraft, as we talked earlier, may not be the best case scenario here, but Spirit needs cash, and it needs to do something by the end of the year when all of its debt will come due. So I'm sure $500 million is going to go a long way, but that's also going to shrink Spirit's fleet and therefore its route network quite a bit, I would think.
If you're just selling off a few dozen planes, that does not sound great. In any, outside of we took delivery of a bunch of new planes, and so now we're retiring this old fleet. That's not what's happening here.
No, this is very much, we need to get rid of these aircraft to raise some capital. It's also leading to the retirement of the A319 at Spirit as a whole, which I believe was always the plan at some point, but maybe not this quickly. But yeah, that's the end of the 319 as a whole at Spirit.
All right.
Yeah.
Jason, when safety regulators issue directives saying this is really, really important that you do this because something very bad could happen if you don't, the timelines are usually fairly quickly, within X number of hours or, within X number of cycles. This A220 software update that regulators say is very, very important that operators take care of. How much time do they have to complete it?
2 years. That is a long time. So the story here is that A220 operators are told to upgrade their flight control software to address, quote, design deficiencies. Reading a quote here from Flight Global, as usual, of course. The mandate follows occurrences of nuisance messages, including rudder, ailerons, or spoiler failures resulting from erroneous transmissions from their remote electronic unit, which handles flight computer commands. This could do things like not prevent inadvertent autopilot engagement during takeoff or unannunciated spoiler deployment, all very bad things that you do not want to happen. And these could lead to a disaster of some sort. Very unlikely, but it's possible. I'm very confused here why operators are being given 2 years to install the software update, which of course will become the new baseline production software. I don't really understand why 2 years, why it's going to take that long. It's a software update. I mean, you should just be able to plug a USB drive into the thing and hit enter and away you go. So this can't be that dramatic of an issue, but why would it take this long?
I'm not a flight control software engineer by any stretch of the imagination. But I assume that there are some sort of something. I honestly don't know why they give them unless the update actually takes a very long time.
I don't see how it
Like the
possibly could.
actual update.
These are modern aircraft. It's not like they're loading in new software using 4,500 floppy disks. At least I hope not. This isn't the
767.
We both went there. We went different directions, but we both went there. But in this case, Transport Canada says if these issues were to occur, it could lead to increased workload and even a, quote, large reduction in safety margins, which isn't really something you want to hear.
No.
So if anyone happens to know why airlines are being given 2 years to do what seems like a very easy to do software update, I'd love to hear it.
Absolutely. Emails, podcasts at fr24.com. With airlines in Russia running low on aircraft and with passenger numbers creeping back up on domestic flights, it sounds like Russia's putting out feelers to see if anybody else wants to operate domestic flights in Russia. At least that's what Reuters is reporting. While no official requests have yet gone out, it sounds like Russia is talking to places like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan to see if they're willing to operate domestic flights within Russia.
Yeah, kind of crazy how quickly we've gone from Russian airlines being allowed to wet lease between each other to asking airlines from an entirely different country to operate domestic flights. So far, apparently the quotes from the Reuters article are other airlines in other countries going, ugh, that's not going to be good for anyone, because it could put that airline or that country in line for sanctions from pretty much everyone else at play. And they probably don't want that to happen. But man, that's a move of, I don't want to say desperation, but certainly an interesting twist. But I can't imagine any airline's going to be jumping at the opportunity to do this because, hey, maybe they never get their aircraft back.
Well, there's that. I mean, but what's one rung above desperation? Whatever that
is. I don't know. Email us.
All right. Fine then. Let's close the show with something that has only taken 8 years. The final report on the crash of EgyptAir Flight 804 was published yesterday, the 29th of October 2024, which is roughly 8 years or more than 8 years after the crash of the A320, which departed Paris bound for Cairo.
Does this predate the podcast? I think it does.
It's 8 months before the podcast.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And we're only getting the final report now.
Correct.
Wow.
So the investigation has been going on for a very, very long time. The crash happened in 2016. It was investigated by Egypt. Then the French got involved, both as where the aircraft took off from, but also because it was an Airbus A320. So the French investigators were a party to the investigation as the state of manufacture. They found the wreckage about a month after the crash. And a few months after the crash, so at the end of June, the Egyptian officials said that the flight data recorder indicated that there was smoke and high temperatures and soot on the forward part of the aircraft. So at that point, nothing more was said. And a few months go by. There's no update on the investigation. And the French get involved. At the end of the year, Egyptian officials say traces of explosives are found on the bodies. So at that point, everyone is thinking that it could possibly or probably be a terrorist attack. Then in 2017, the French BEA conducted its own investigation. They couldn't find any explosive residue. No one has ever claimed responsibility for the crash. And the BEA put together a scenario in which there was a rapidly spreading fire on the flight deck. They didn't say exactly what, could possibly cause that fire at the time. So fast forward from, this is mid 2018 by now, 4 years go by. The BEA conducts further analysis and makes a report on possibilities about how this fire could have been caused, one of which was an oxygen leak in the first officer's emergency oxygen mask, as well as cigarette smoking on the flight deck. Today, or yesterday, Egypt Civil Aviation Authority, so that was April 2022, by the way. So 2 years later, after a lot of back and forth and contentious meetings, Egypt releases its report saying that the crash was the result of an explosion in the galley behind the flight deck. The BEA continues to disagree with that analysis and asked that their report and comments on the final report be amended to Egypt's final report, similar to what the NTSB did for the Ethiopian report into the crash of ET-302.
Yeah, and this is also somewhat similar to the 1999 crash of Egypt Air Flight 990, where the Egyptian authorities and the US NTSB had very different outcomes to their respective investigations. Interesting that keeps happening with Egypt Air. Very different situation this time, of course, because I don't know if we'll ever truly know what happened. But yeah, there's a bit of a pattern there, isn't there?
Part of the issue here is that there were allegations that the aircraft should not have been flying, that there were defects with this particular aircraft that should have prevented it from operating passenger service. And so I don't think we'll ever know for sure, but you can look at the report, which we will link in the show notes. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, because it is a long report, it's 660 pages. Oof. Lots of pictures, lots of graphs. But if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, they have the chart section or the table section that has what the BEA wants to comment on, the Egyptian investigators' response, and then how that conversation is reflected in the final report, which I think is incredibly important to see. That investigators are coming at this from different angles, and that you have the ability to see where the investigators are drawing their information from and how those ideas about what caused the crash, how they come to be in the final report. So I think it's worth looking at regardless. And I think it's very interesting about how the international cooperation works in an accident investigation. Jason, what do you say we stop talking and wait for whatever's going to happen after?
Okay, well, it's got an hour and 15 minutes before we typically record, so I'm sure nothing will happen. It's all good.
If something does happen, we will certainly talk about it on next week's episode. But until then, this has been episode 292 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.